Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Future Trends Forum. My name is Brian Alexander. I'm your host, the creator of the forum, and your chief cat herder for the next hour. I'm delighted to see all of you here, and I'm looking forward to today's conversation. So to begin, let me introduce the forum, tell you what it is, where it comes from, how we support it, and then I'll introduce this week's guest, and we'll dive into conversation. So over the next slide, please. The Future Trends Forum is a discussion-oriented video project. It spun out of the Future Trends in Technology and Education report. If you don't know that, FTTE is a monthly trends analysis that looks at major trends reshaping the higher education technology as we know it. It's been following a clutch of about 86 trends for coming up in 5 years, so we have a lot of interesting longitudinal data. If you haven't had a chance to take a look at it, go to ftte.us, download a few copies, and if you like it, sign up. But that's a publication. What we do here is discussion. Over to the next slide, please. The forum and FTTE are part of a broader project called the Future of Education Observatory. And this is a multimedia, social, interactive, open, and ongoing attempt to try and grapple with the future of education technology. So this so far includes a variety of projects, including the forum, including the FTTE report, as well as a book club, as well as a bookstore, along with an ongoing blog. And a couple more projects about to come out. If you haven't seen it yet, go to futureofeducation.us and learn more. Now over to the next slide, please. Now, a key detail about this is that all this work at trying to understand the future of education technology is transnational. We are trying to understand it by looking across national boundaries and across continents, because the changes that are happening in education really occur globally. The next big thing, the next major development might not occur in Silicon Valley. It might come from Burundi or from China or from Central Europe. So we have to have that conversation going at a global level. Now, over to the next slide, please. So this is what the forum is. Let me tell you who supports it and how we make it possible. So first of all, I want to thank NYSERNet from New York State. This is a nonprofit that helps keep that state's colleges, universities, and libraries online at good broadband. We're very grateful to them for all their work and for all their support. We're also grateful to Shindig, because you can tell Shindig makes available this very technology. So let me take a minute just to show you where all the different pieces are and how you can use it to best communicate and share your thoughts. Where I am right now is called the stage. It's called that because everybody involved in this video conference can see and hear what I'm doing. Now, next to me, you can see, just for a minute, a slide stack. What we'll be replacing that with is our guest. And in fact, you can join us up here. We can have up to 4 people up here at a time. Think of it as a kind of live video conference panel. Now below us is the participant swarm. This is where right now we have 50 people who are all, you can see all their individual icons moving and sliding. Some of them are individual people with their video feeds, so we can take a look at Kelsey O'Brien right now. Some of them are just silhouettes, like Virginia McGree. But if you look at each of them, you can get a glimpse of who they are and what they do. Now, if you'd like to talk to one of them, simply double-click on their icon. If they're interested in talking to you, your 2 icons can click together. You'll have your own private audio-visual bubble, which is pretty neat. Now, there are a lot of ways to communicate. I'm going to show you the big 3 right now. Look at the very bottom of the screen. Running along it is a white strip with a bunch of different buttons. On the far left edge of it, you'll see what looks like a few human heads and a kind of cartoon dialog box. If you click on that, 2 things pop up. On the left side of the pop-up is a kind of film strip showing everybody who's in on this video conference right now. So you can just mouse over it and get a sense of who people are and what they do, which is pretty handy. On the right edge is the chat box, where everyone can type in conversations as they go. So there's Tom Riley just shared his link to his Big Moon Dig project. We just heard from the splendidly named Jedediah Rex from Beloit. Veronica Armour has just joined us from New Jersey. So during this next hour, you can ask questions, push ideas. We often find people, when they hear something or something occurs to them, they'll paste in a URL to a web page or a website. So you can use that chat box. I'll be monitoring it throughout. Now, if you close that just for a second, back to that white strip, there are 2 other options you can use for communicating. Next to the button I just showed you is a question mark with a circle around that. If you click that, up will pop a very simple box. That's a question box where you can type in a comment, thought, question, pushback, criticism, celebration, or an example that you want us to share. So type that in, hit send. And when the time is right, we'll flash it on the screen so everyone can see it, and I'll read it out loud so everyone can hear it. Now Back down that white strip is another way to interact. There's a raised hand button. If you click that, it tells us that you want to join us up here on stage, which is great. Now, make sure that your mic is working. Make sure that your video camera is working, and make sure you're also in a place where you can talk out loud and not be seen as schizophrenic. So if all that's working, click the raised hand button, let us know, we'll be glad to have you join us. It's actually easier to do than what's really described. So the raised hand for video, that circle with a question mark for questions, the chat box, those are 3 great ways for communicating with us. If that's not enough, if you're a Twitter person, Twitter user, just use the hashtag FTTE, and we'll be following Twitter throughout. So again, what I'm doing now, I'm talking to you, I've got a slide, I'm going to stop that in a minute, because this is really about discussion involving you. I want to hear your thoughts and questions. And I'm very, very grateful to Shindig for letting us use the technology that enables this kind of conversation to happen. We're also grateful to one more source. We're grateful to the small community of supporters on Patreon. If you don't know Patreon, it's a crowdfunding site which allows people to support creative people making new stuff. In this case, it's me making all this future of education technology work. So if you look at that chart or that screenshot, you'll see people like Michael Haggins, Bob Johnson, Corey S., Robin DeRosa, Chris Lott, Tom Ames, Karen, Mateer, all contributing as little as $1 a month to make sure that we have the lights on, the technology humming, and bring all this to you. So go to patreon.com/Brian Alexander if you haven't already. Check it out. We'd be glad for any support you can give, and we're very grateful to all of our patrons. Now, that's where we came from. That's how we support all of this work. That's how it functions. Let me introduce this week's guest and this week's topic. We've been thinking about how generations change with technology and education for quite some time. We think about this in terms of the next generation. We think about it in terms of kids growing up with technology. This is a major, major topic for everybody involved in education, from pre-K through graduate school. So in order to explore that topic, I'm very, very excited to invite Matt Worwood up on the stage. Matt is the founding director of the Class of 2032 project, which is a documentary project and a film that you can learn about. He's an Apple Distinguished Educator. He's the associate director of digital media and design at the University of Connecticut, not too far from me. And we're going to invite him up to talk. So while we beam him up on stage, Tara, if you could do that, everybody think about the questions you'll have. Think about the comments you'll have. I have a whole bunch, but I want to hear from you as well. So, Matt, speaking of hearing, can you hear us okay?
I can. Can you hear me, Brian?
Perfectly. Very, very good to see you and hear you.
Good to see you as well, Brian.
I have to ask, is it sunny down there in Connecticut?
I have the blinds closed. Yeah, the sun's out a little bit. Got a little bit of sunshine. I'm not a big fan of this time of the year. I suffer from allergies, so my eyes might be puffy and I'm undone.
I understand. The biome shifts and decides to attack your immune system. I hope you feel better, and I hope you survive, and that the heat eventually drives all that forward. We're really grateful to you for making the time to talk with us and to share your work. To begin with, can you tell us what you work on when you're not working on the Class of 2032?
Well, when I'm not working on the Class of 2032, I actually I'm a proud parent. I try and spare that moment I have with my boys and being as active as I can. If you're asking about my role here at the University of Connecticut, I lead the Digital Media and Design Department at the Stanford campus. I've been around now for about 4 or 5 years, so we're a pretty new program. And we offer a BA or a BFA in digital media. So, yeah.
Well, that's terrific. That's obviously a field that's of a great deal of interest and rising interest. So that's excellent. And thank you, by the way, for answering my question by talking about your own children. I really appreciate that. How old are they now?
They are, I shouldn't be pausing. So 1, 4, that's because they all kind of have just moved up in age over the last few months. Right. So they're kind of back-to-back birthdays. So
if you have a 1-year-old in that brace, I'm just amazed you can stand erect. So well done.
Yeah.
Well, tell us about the Class of 2032. What was your inspiration for making it, and how did you make all this?
Well, so I that's kind of why I start off with the parent piece, because I thought about the project from the perspective of being a parent, right? I'm in digital media, I'm in education, I'm seeing this evolving and growing landscape of digital technologies that are allowing us to change how we're interacting with information and interact for information for learning. And you know, my wife's probably going to kill me for telling this story, but she likes to keep the house clean, right? And she's got like a whole load of boys, and it's probably very challenging for her to do that. And I probably could be better at supporting her do that. But as part of that effort, she doesn't like fingerprints on the television screen. So we find ourselves in a situation where my middle guy, Liam, who at the time I think was about 18 months, he kept we kept finding his fingerprints on the television, and eventually we were noting that we would put Netflix on the screen. He would go up and he would kind of tap the images on the screen, and then he would hit them. And I realized that he was hitting them with frustration because they weren't responding to his instant touch. So I sat there thinking to myself, here's this 18-month-old child who we've just got this super duper 3D Samsung television, which can pretty much give him anything he wants on demand. And he's getting frustrated. He thinks it's broken to him. So I started to ask the question, what is he going to expect from his future school experience, right? And that just got me off on this road. And I just finished a film called Creativity in Education, and I don't really consider myself as a filmmaker, but that's how I like to explore issues and problems and how I try and make sense of them. So I started to think, wow, this might be an interesting film to explore. And as I connected with a colleague, Samantha Alshin, here from the University of Connecticut. And as we started to explore the idea of making this film, eventually it grew into this larger crowdsourcing project, because really what we cared about wasn't necessarily answering the question about what the future school experience will be like. It was more about engaging in a conversation relevant to these children growing up right now and thinking about the world that they're immersed in right now, and then thinking about what they might expect from the future school experience. So that was a long answer there, Brian, but that's really where it came from.
It's an elegant answer, actually, that goes right to the point. Friends, I just shared the link to their website through the chat box if you haven't already seen it. I have more questions, but before I can do that, we have Steve Covello who has a question for you. Let's bring Steve up on stage. See if we can do that.
Hi, everybody.
Hello,
Welcome
Steve.
to Concord. Hi, Brian. Welcome to Concord, New Hampshire, Granite State College. Thanks. This is a very rich discussion. I'm really looking forward to it. So my question, and first I just want to preface that I'm not trying to suggest what I'm about to say has any reflection on my being a parent or that my kids are super genius or anything like that. But naturally, since I'm an instructional designer, here I am observing my kids and how they learn. And, I just can't help but be making some notes about how I had been educated in my master's degree program in terms of theories and strategies and so forth, and observing how my kids are completely going around everything that I've learned about instructional design. And so my question here is, and again, I'm reading from a prepared thing here, so I'm sorry if I sound scripted. I've discovered that my kids who are ages almost 12 and 13, learn entirely on their own through YouTube and their friends with little or no intervention from me. So, for example, they learned Minecraft, they learned GarageBand, they learned Ableton Live, they learned illustration and animation. Zero input from me. And so, and the thing is, this style of learning spans not just personal interests, but academic interests. And we just had another firestorm of homework problems the other night because my daughter was frustrated that she had to learn the way the instructor wants her to learn and not the way she wants to. So my question is, what does this mean for the teaching profession when it is clear that these students here are able to learn far more efficiently and often more deeply when they are learning at their own pace using only the media that they find useful?
That's a great question. Great question.
So I think it's a great question as well. And I think it speaks, I feel like I begin to explore that question in the film. I think that, first of all, we've got this, I refer to it as almost like two hats of learning. We've got our hat for how we're interacting with information and learning outside the classroom environment. And then we've got our hat for learning while inside the classroom environment. And I'll answer the question from what I observed from my children, and I kind of addressed it in the film. I think YouTube's a great example, right? Because I use YouTube as an example about what it really means to have access to the whole world's information using these small touchscreen devices. And my boys, consistently, all three of them, first really became acquainted with these small devices by FaceTiming, at the time Skyping with my mum, who lived in the UK. She used to refer to herself as Skypogram. And it was amazing to see the relationship that they were developing, to the extent that I have a picture of my eldest son who has this iPad, and he's cut out a mermaid, and he's basically turned my mum into a mermaid. So he's got the iPad, and he's got the tail, and he's taking around the house playing a game with her as the mermaid. And you see these relationships they're developing. Then, of course, everyone can experience, the young kids, with the YouTube app, and them getting obsessed with, Ryan's toy review, or the unboxing videos. And you're sitting there, and a lot of us can be concerned about that, right? Especially that they can look obsessed and addicted to YouTube. And I saw that kind of happening around 2 or 3. And then what I did, Steve, is I kind of came in and started to work with Lucas, my oldest son, to say, look, this could be utilized as a learning tool. This can provide you with information. And I've written a blog on my dadforcreativity.com where I likened YouTube as an encyclopedia. So to your point, especially with voice activation, right, voice search, they don't even have to know how to spell the words now. So Lucas taught himself all about Pangea by just clicking on YouTube and saying, tell me about Pangea, and has these selection of videos. And I've captured all of that in the film. And the reason why I've kind of given you that long explanation to start off is that so many of these experiences began before he entered formal schooling. So he was already beginning to access information and answer his questions via the YouTube app, to your point, independent from me. And then, of course, he transitions into formal learning, and he's engaging in, for the most part, a traditional school experience. I think it's wrong for us to say that the schooling hasn't changed, because we are certainly starting to see more technologies integrated into the school experience. But Steve, I think one of the conversations that I think we need to have is building this bridge between what's happening at, in essence, the preschool level within these informal school environments and these home environments, and then making sure there's a better transition to when they enter formal schooling, because we need support from the parents, and we also need support that these devices can become more than just unboxing videos. Because the example I shared about my son always using it for learning, I'm not convinced that's the same for everyone. Some people might just be using them for unboxing videos all the time, and we're not using them or leveraging them to their potential. So I think that's what you're speaking about, Steve, because ultimately, if we don't do that, that's why at 12 or 13, they're going to still feel disconnected.
Do you mind if I ask sort of a higher level question that relates to what you just said?
Just one follow-up. Go ahead.
What I'm curious to know, really, on a higher level, is whether at a certain point, when we start thinking about education, whether we start to separate the kinds of learning that requires, like, going to a school, and the kinds of learning that don't require going to a school, and whether we start giving learners the choice to decide, well, I could learn algebra a lot better if I just did it on my own, and we let them do that. And it's just a curious point of decision at some point as educators to start thinking about the concept of education as a whole, given that you have a whole generation that would prefer to do this on their own. Assessment's a whole other issue here, but I mean, it's a curious thing to extend that thought beyond just the classroom, meshing and overlapping between outside and inside learning, as you described, into a much larger conversation about education. That's all, Brian. Thank you.
Oh, that's a great thought.
Right.
Francie, please.
I think one of the things that we have to recognize is that we can't see the educator as primarily the one-way source of information now, right? Like pre the digital world, school was seen as the primary source of information transfer. It's where we've got Alison King's concept of that sage on the stage. And certainly that model doesn't work anymore. But when we start going down that road of constructivism and social constructivism and social cultural learning experiences, I think to Steve's point, there's going to be time where information can be accessed more successfully, more efficiently outside of the classroom environment. But the educator, I still think, is pivotal in supporting students construct meaning from the experiences that they're having with that information. But they, of course, need support in transitioning that role.
Oh, thank you. That's a great transition. Seems to be the major theme here. But we have a couple more questions that have just come up. We have Jim Holton, who wants to follow up, and he says, with children learning in the out-of-school methods, how do we as a society deal with the issue of misinformation? Great question, Jim.
Yeah. So when I started, my hope with the Class of 2032 project is to first of all expand it to a larger group, not just myself and my colleague Samantha Olshan, and really look at producing multiple films that address different issues. But for this film, I'll speak to this. When I started this, and Brian, you were interviewed in the film. So when I started to conduct interviews early on, we're talking about spring 2016. And so when I was posing questions about the future of learning, we were talking about primarily technologies. Very consistent. The responses I was getting about the future of technology, we had a lot of the concept of creating and making and constructivism. And then suddenly we had the presidential election. And in the fall semester in 2016, the interviews that I conducted after that, the responses were completely different. The conversation centered around media literacy, or information literacy, or digital literacy. There's different words, and I kind of grabbed media literacy because I think at the moment we're, at least from the perspective of the film, I'm talking primarily about the context of them interacting with media. And here's the problem: is that again, it's happened so quickly that even educators are probably victims to misinformation on their social media newsfeed. The concept of confirmation bias, which of course existed before digital media, but is so prominent today. We all have our own biases. I was teaching a class the other day. This is one of my greatest concerns. We're overwhelmed with information. We're saturated with information. And no one really knows how to deal with it. I liken it in the film, as a traditional school experience of being like the steady flow of a stream, where the information is kind of predictable, we can control it. And the digital age is really like the rapid racing towards a cliff's edge. It's very difficult for us to find our footing, and I think some educators or school districts, try and solve the problem by just banning YouTube, banning Google altogether, because then they're maintaining control over the information that the students are accessing within their formal learning environments. But the problem is that isn't addressing the problems that we have in society about the misuse of information, manipulating information, the type of things we saw with Cambridge Analytica. And I think that this is a question that educators can't resolve by themselves. They need support from all of society, but we certainly need to make sure that we're finding ways to educate students I like how to navigate the world's information, including social media. Like if they're primarily accessing information from social media or just doing a Google search and taking the first one or two rows, we've got to teach them to think more critically. That's a key. It's not just about getting them to think creatively. We've got to get them to just pause and answer some very simple questions about the information they're accessing. Hillary, I remember I was looking at the film and one of them was Hillary plans war on Russia. Just pause for a moment. Do we really need social media to flag that post as potentially being misinformation? Or as Jonathan Plucker references in the film, isn't it better for the students to figure it out? Couldn't they just pause and not just students,
Yeah.
people into schools and say, wait, does this make sense?
So we have digital literacy.
Yeah, we're not doing it. We're not doing that. And I think that's the challenge.
That's an important finding. We have a question coming up. Let me just quickly ask you a question about your method. So to make this film, you did a lot of interviews. You said that you crowdsourced ideas. Can you speak to how you did all of that?
Sure. So there's really two parts to the project. There's the film, and I conducted about 15 to 16 interviews, and I worked hard. You know, there's limited resources when you're producing a film with pretty much no budget available to you. But I tried to make sure that we had technologists, that we had educators, and just everyday classroom teachers. I also wanted to get some of the voices from recent graduates in the film as well to get their perspective. And then obviously scholars. We had Michael Lynch, who refers to himself very much as a philosopher. So we had some good voices in the film, and we had Dan Kogan-Drew, who co-founded New Zeller. So kind of good rounded group of folks. And they were really kind of responding to the questions about the future of schooling and the challenges. But in terms of the crowdsourcing piece, that is a project that we're really, I think, just beginning that. And so that's now a 60-minute workshop, Brian. It's a 60-minute workshop. We spent a couple of years really trying to find methods to engage a group in conversations about the future school experience. They can have a rich discussion. And we kind of like document all of the ideas, and we're hoping every year we can produce a poster that can kind of like provide a summary of all the ideas that we've generated. And we've just released an app on the App Store, so iTunes and Android, and you can find a link to it on the website. And that helps facilitate this discussion. And I am hoping to make sure that the ideas we get each year, we might ask different questions or evaluate the data differently as we move forward. It's very much qualitative methods, but we want to keep sharing that information every year to make sure these ideas are available to everyone. So it's definitely the film, and then we've got the crowdsourcing piece. So two separate pieces.
It's a nice pair. By the way, we have a video question that's come up from Tom Ames, so we can bring Tom up on stage. I've been in one of those workshops, and it was fantastic. It was very, very creative, very playful, very challenging, different from most workshops I've seen in higher education. So I want to recommend that.
Hello.
So speaking of different, hello, Tom. Oh, we just lost him. He'll come back in. Oh, that was fast. Let's see if we can get we need some a drum roll.
Hold on.
How was that, Tom?
All right.
Can you hear us?
Can you hear me now?
Perfectly.
Yeah. Nope.
Yeah, I can hear you, Tom.
Please go ahead.
Hey, Matt. I feel like I just saw you a couple weeks ago. How you doing?
Good.
So my question is as follows. You already talked about this, the children self-exploring, learning their way through school in terms of their own drive and their own momentum. One of the struggles that I think as a parent and as a teacher that I think most people have to deal with is how do you stimulate that curiosity? And because there's so much of the world that's just sort of thrown at our kids now that they don't have to explore. They can just sort of let it wash over them. And now somebody else is controlling that. And then from an educator's perspective, how do you put structure around that in an effective way without strangling off that curiosity? Because I see that a lot in schools. It's actually in some ways much more pernicious than the you can't bring device to school problem. It's the, well, you have to look at this and not this, or you can't explore and you have to follow the rubric, do step 1, step 2, step 3, and oh yeah, you can use a YouTube video here, but it has to be, and so a lot of what school does is beat creativity out of kids. And I mean, in many ways, I consider myself to be self-educated because I read my way through school, which was the old school version of YouTube. But I didn't read what they were telling me to read. I just went off and read. And so, but this is a struggle I have with my own kids because, I mean, they're they're creative in their own way. They're very smart in most cases, in their own ways, but at the same time, I see those creative and smart impulses often get strangled off with, "Oh my God, we've got to do well on the STAR test."
Yeah, I think Tom, you've also connected a little bit to what Steve I think had brought up earlier. And there's a few different ways to answer that. And forgive me, anyone who's made a film before, you'll know that you kind of spend just 2 years just listening to everyone you interviewed in the sound bites. So I can't help but constantly talk to people. But Jonathan Plucker, who's from Johns Hopkins University, he kind of like we had a number of conversations. Our conversation centered a lot around this, Tom. Some of it got into the film, some of it didn't. But first of all, he speaks about creativity, about making new stuff from old stuff, and Jonathan Plucker is a creativity scholar as well. So it's really important that we understand the old stuff in order to make new stuff. And I think there's a need, therefore, for some guidance. Like, again, teachers continue to be essential. It's important that we go to school. We need to generate the knowledge necessary in order to make the new stuff. But I think that the way I handle it as a parent, and I mean, you said yourself, you would go to the encyclopedia. And in fact, to quote Jonathan Plucker, the way my son would have an innate interest in the environment or climate change or Pangea, that was internal, and he would go and express that interest and explore that interest through YouTube. But actually, you saw people doing that previously with encyclopedias and books and looking at pictures. So the desire to go and seek out learning and our own curiosity isn't that different. It's just that the manner in which we do it is different. And also, I would say the fact that, as I referenced earlier with the YouTube app, we don't need to have traditional literacy skills now, rightly or wrongly. We can just, with our voice, request information and we can receive it via video. But I think the key is not being all in the technology. I look at Lucas, my eldest, and I think about the questions that he has about the world, and those questions have come to him from outside the digital experience. They've come from a nature walk where he kind of interacts with nature. They come from staring up at the sky and asking about stars. They come from something that stimulated him at school, and he wants to go and learn more about it. It comes from when he's sick, and we start talking about why our body gets a hot temperature. I mentioned my allergies the other day, and I was in the car, and he said, "Oh, Daddy, that's your immune system attacking the allergens." And you got that from YouTube because I've been talking a little bit about it. So I think the key is utilizing, again, it comes to making these digital technologies seen as a tool for learning, and then teaching them how to go and explore their curiosity for it. So it's about how you connect the questions they're generating about their world, which are probably based on their own individual interests, and then providing them with opportunities to go and explore that curiosity in the digital world. And I think the problem with schooling is they probably don't provide that opportunity. They're probably still, some school experiences are sticking to, well, no, the second grade you learn this, the third grade you learn that, the fourth grade you learn that. And of course, now we're starting getting into personalized learning, and that's going to be another challenge for the future of schooling, is that everyone's getting very, the experiences that we have these personalized experience, personalized news feeds, personalized search results. And so it's going to be very difficult for schools to replicate that. I don't have the answer to that, but I think that's a significant challenge, is replicating that in the classroom environment.
Right, I agree. Yeah, no, you did. And I think there's a larger question of that. I see a universe of ideas, but I have tools in me that have been cultivated by an overabundance of liberal arts education that allow me to see those constellations. What I'm seeing with my kids a lot of times, though, is just random stars and things popping off. Oh, this is interesting. Oh, this is interesting. And they don't see those connections. And I try to give them those connections wherever possible as a parent, saying, oh, well, that this is happening because of this over here that you were talking about last week. I don't see the school systems doing that. I think one of the problems is this atomized industrial school mindset that we have, and you don't talk about history in English class too, and so that there's a disconnect there between the way information is flowing to our kids and the way they're being trying to assemble it at this point. So I think that's a real challenge for reinventing school going forward, and that's structural at a very deep level. And I don't know how do you get away from that, right? But great, thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Tom.
Well, thank you, Tom. It's a really, really deep question. And Matt, thank you for thinking through this so deeply. We had a quick question from Veronica Armour about that, who wants to know, we'll just grab this for a second. How would you compare what you were talking about with Montessori education?
Was that question to me, Brian?
Yeah, sorry, that's from Veronica Armour. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know if I've shared something, but my eldest son had a Montessori education to start off with. So when I was responding to Tom, subconsciously, so that's a weird question, subconsciously asking myself, did some of his questions that came out of the classroom environment that was explored on YouTube exist because he had a Montessori education, right? I didn't reference that to Tom because I thought it was going to be information overload, because I can do that sometimes, but I was thinking that, and I think it probably addresses what Tom was talking about. The Montessori experience that I saw with my child, Lucas, was the fact that as he generated questions, he was able to explore those questions and able to focus in on those questions and probably not bounce all over the place. He was probably supported and guided. And I think that I'm an advocate for Montessori education without a doubt. And I think we're back with what Tom referenced. The problem is it's not teachers. The problem is we have this system of schooling, and it can be very... I connect with a lot of teachers. If we go to the crowdsourcing project, Brian, when I engage students in that conversation, I think pretty much every single educator recognizes the need for more personalized learning. I mean, that is one of the most popular trends that I see in these ideation workshops, project-based learning, the idea that students are pursuing their own individual interests. But the problem is the idea that the system is so rigid and stuck with the 45, 50-minute math lesson. This is where you wear the math hat. 45, 50-minute science question. This is where you have the science hat. And I think that the Montessori philosophy really kind of allows you to kind of bounce. It allows you to wear all the hats at the same time. It doesn't kind of silo subjects. And going back to Tom's point, I think that's one of the challenges with education right now. And it's perhaps why we value makerspace as an outlet, is because it isn't kind of necessarily specific to a discipline. It's tough. If you're a science teacher, right, and you know that you're being evaluated by these high-stakes tests, state-mandated tests, and you know that you've got to tick these boxes and march through the curriculum at this pace,
right.
And you've got no incentive to change, right? There's not an incentive to change, right? I think that it's going to take a lot for our education system to suddenly, all of the educators suddenly to switch and start answering these questions. It's hard.
That's a revolution to think about. We have, looking ahead that way, looking ahead to where this could go, we get a great question from Phil Katz. He asks, how many future school experiences do you imagine? Is there a practical or a theoretical limit to how many varieties can coexist without the idea of school collapsing completely? Or is that the goal?
That's a really, really good question. And, without a doubt, in the ideation workshops, pretty consistently someone will pose the question, do they really need school? Do they really need to come to school? And I interpret those questions then referring to school as the tradition, how it exists today, right? And we know that in higher education, we're being challenged with alternative experiences, right? One of the things that higher education still offer is the piece of paper, the degree, and that degree has so much value in industry. But in terms of the learning experiences that higher education offer, it could be argued that for some of them, you can get those experiences outside of the institution that you're at. We've got the video tutorial, we've got online education, we've got the MOOCs, we've got the meetups, we've got the maker spaces, we've got the hackathons. So I would think there's probably lots of different ways of learning. I think there's also we've had ideas in the ideation workshops. I found this interesting. The idea that there's no school districts anymore, right? So physics, I know in Connecticut, a physics teacher, for example, it'd be quite hard to find a physics teacher. Well, what if there's just a physics teacher? I'm a physics teacher, and I designed a number of curriculum, and I'm hired to go and teach in multiple school districts during the year. And my curriculum's offered, and maybe it's a hybrid experience. So I'm at District A on a Monday and District B on a Tuesday, and District C on another day. And it's probably a very effective way for school districts to share their resources. So I think that that's another possibility is kind of like, we're already kind of seeing that to some extent with online learning. Some schools will provide, if they don't have the ability to provide, certain classes, they'll find online alternatives that can be taught in the classroom. I think it's endless. I think the possibilities are endless. But I do think that there still is obviously a journey, a beginning, middle, and end to the school experience. I'm not sure that, going back to Tom and creativity, the idea of making new things out of old stuff, there's still probably going to be a need for us to scaffold the knowledge that's been generated. And therefore, I think it is going to be important that there is some type of structure in place. It doesn't become chaotic. There's a beginning to your education experience, and there's kind of like an end to your education experience. I think that will be important, whatever idea that we do.
So we come back to, again, a synthesis, a combination of students learning outside of the classroom, outside of school, but also benefiting from what's in school. It's almost like you're flipping the entire education system, not just an individual class. Friends, we have about 11 minutes left, and I want to make sure that everyone gets a chance to ask questions. And I don't want to take over myself. We had a couple of questions, or rather a couple of comments that came in from people in the chat mentioning questions of governance and how to do this. Phil Katz asks or observes the teaching model works best with pesky unions or local political control. Kelly Walsh adds that I see this potentially tying to competency-based education. Let students learn the competencies the way they see fit, and school exists to provide guidance and support as needed. So these syntheses are very, very challenging. I have a quick practical question while everybody else is thinking and bringing in their thoughts and comments. Practically, how does one see this documentary? Are you going to be doing a nationwide tour? Are you going to publish it online? Or what's the best way to find it and access it?
Well, Brian, you said yourself, I've got the 1-year-old, right? So I've been kind of like struggling to stay afloat over the last few months. But without a doubt, I'm seeing this by probably August time. This film will be available on the website. So I definitely see this as an open source project. I want to share those ideas. I want to share the film. And I'm hopeful that maybe there's an opportunity for schools to maybe host a screening of the film and invite parents, because I'm back to that parent piece. I think that I hope that the film, as the first in the series, can help clarify the problem a little bit that we're currently experiencing, where the display come from and how it's challenging our existing education experience. So it's not designed just for educators. When I make this film, I also ask questions about how will my wife perceive it, for example, because I see her as a potential market, a parent of young children. So I'd like to see screenings in schools, and maybe if there's a way that I can support that, I'd be happy to do that. And then possibly after the screening or before the screening, it will be great for people to download the app and engage in the professional development experience. I'm certainly interested to know if having a better understanding of the problem leads to more informed ideas in the education sector. And so, so hopefully having them both available at no cost provides a PD opportunity for schools, but also a way to engage parents and even a fundraiser. You know, I also thought that schools could do fundraisers and stuff like that for it.
Well, it's good to have this out there. And thank you, by the way, for open sourcing this so people can see it. We had a question from Val Bach, or a comment. She says that one of the main purposes of formal schooling has been introducing the various frameworks used by humans for making sense. The scientific method is one. The construction of a 5-paragraph essay is another. It's hard to discover them on one's own. That's interesting. So those are methodologies, the kind that you need to learn and practice. Are those the kind that students that we need to have curriculum to require that kind of thing?
I know I go back to what I said. I think that the teacher is being the main source of information in terms of, that transmittal model, I don't think makes sense. But in terms of constructing meaning and helping students, guiding students to make meaning of the information, I think they're essential. I think for facilitating those social, cultural learning experiences as well, again, I think teachers are essential. I know that there's a lot of conversation right now about teachers transitioning into being designers and problem solvers. I think that's really going to be the role of the teacher in the future, is that they're designing these learning experiences that are meaningful and valuable, and also perhaps produce products that can be shared beyond the four walls of the classroom, that have value beyond the four walls of the classroom. If we go back to Tom's question about creativity, I always say that, like, one thing that technology does provide us with an opportunity. It's not just about I'm going to go and make a video to make a video. No. We don't want to do that. We don't want to just rush to creating and making. But can we find a real world problem that we tackle as a group? Brian, I'll quote you in the film. You refer to the future experience as possibly being a place where it's like a studio, where the instructor is working with the students like they might work in a lab or a studio. And so they go on this experience, they identify a real world problem that they want to solve. The real world problem might provide opportunities for them to go and explore things like the scientific method, so they can generate new knowledge that obviously can be validated. And then they take that knowledge, and that is the knowledge that's shared in the video. And so now the video is not just new, but it offers value beyond the four walls of the classroom. And that's really what we're talking about, I think, with creativity. So you've got the little c creativity as something that's new and useful to the individual. But I think digital technology allows us to move up the creativity scale, which is the idea that we want the output, the outcome, to have value beyond the individual. So it has maybe a value to the school community, the town. And I think that's a viable learning experience that requires the teacher. So as well as the scientific methods and the frameworks, absolutely essential. The teacher is also essential in guiding students along that path. I want to be clear. I believe that it's essential. I believe that we want to have these social experiences in the classroom, and I think that the teacher is a very, very important part of that conversation. And in the crowdsourcing projects, when I get something like a quote such as an Amazon Echo-like device will replace the teacher, those types of ideas are coming from the mindset that the teacher is still the main deliverer of information. They're the part. That's not what the future school experience is, and I hope that's not where we head down, because that's why I don't think, at least for the near future, over the next 15, 20 years, the concept of virtual tutors and things like that, we've got to be careful with those things.
Thank you. That goes back to our questions about teachers and their role, and as well as governance, I think. We have, thank you, Matt. We have another question coming in at a larger scale from Tom Riley, and we'll see if we can bring him up on video. Hello, Tom. Can you hear us?
I can hear you just fine.
Great, great.
That's in the way there. Okay. I'm a futurist. The 21st century is very, very unlike the 20th. You seem to be addressing problems of the 20th century without admitting the big problems of the 21st, global warming being the most well known, although not the worst. What environment of the world are you seeing that this new educational approach will be used in?
That's a good question. Thank you, Tom.
So you're asking. So I get the. So media literacy you would refer to maybe as a 20th century problem, and you're looking at more global problems.
You are
For the future.
treating it. The classroom you're in isn't a 19th century, 18th century classroom until it started adding small amounts of electronics at the end of the 20th century, not very effectively. But the 20th century is gone, past, passé, no more. The 21st is on us. Problems like sea level rise, wiping out the livelihood of hundreds of millions of Bangladeshis, has got to be addressed. And if you pretend these problems, if you pretend that you cannot talk about such problems, then you cannot design a teaching procedure to teach how to address these problems.
So I think you bring up a good point, and what I would say is it comes back in some ways to the conversations we have had, right? Is if right now I think a problem in society is information. So I ask myself, like, why do we actually still debate climate change? Why is it still a debate? And I think because of the fact that right now we as a society are struggling with the fact that we have a massive amount of information that's overwhelming. And it's very difficult to distinguish what is accurate information and inaccurate information. And until we can really grasp some of these challenges, I think it's difficult in some ways for us to generate the knowledge needed to have these types of conversations in the classroom. Because I speak to science teachers, because I agree what you're saying, but I speak to science teachers who unfortunately tell me that they get nervous about addressing the climate change issue in class because they're told they get given facts, or should we say alternative facts, are presented to them. And if they challenge those facts, they sometimes have to deal with an email from a parent and the principal. And I think that until we address the problem of media literacy, I think it's difficult for us to have these conversations, which are so important. So I actually see media literacy as a problem.
Is that you have to deal with people who've got their heads stuck back in the 18th century. And we have to deal with the 21st. The people you are teaching have absolutely no option but to deal with the 21st century. They're living it. And I don't care what stupid little emails you get. You're going to have a long, hard slog. And if you leave them to be blindsided by these big events, they just have no choice, no chance, when in fact the resources are available, the technologies are available, we can take them on. It's very positive if we just get organized and get some leadership.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Tom. I really appreciate you framing this at the larger scale, too. I'm also conscious of the fact that we're right at the end of the hour, just about. And I'd like to ask you, Matt, one more question, which is, where does this project go next? You were talking about the idea of maybe having follow-up films, although right now you might be tired of that. You've asked us to download the app and have these kind of conversations ourselves, which sounds great. So you've got the video angle and you've got the crowdsourcing discussion angle. Is that the dual path forward, or are there any other developments in the future for your future work?
I think there's a few things, Brian. I think one, I'm interested in collaborative partnerships now. So to people that particularly interested in the conversation, and what questions come out of the conversation. In terms of future films, I'm a little bit uncomfortable sharing this, but I'm very conscious that the film is coming from the perspective of a white middle class parent and child, and that is, I want to kind of explore alternative voices as well in the future project. So that's something I would like to do. And I also would like to find a way to tell the story of specific educators that, despite the system, are able to kind of produce these really creative and meaningful learning experiences. So how do they work with the system? So there are some ideas for future film projects that I have. In regards to the crowdsourcing project, I hope to just continue to grow that, expand that, to try and build some frameworks to evaluate the ideas. And then in the future, how do we visualize some of these ideas? Help further the conversation. That's something that I'm also interested in doing. So if anyone's interested in connecting afterwards, I'm more than happy to do that.
And we have the webpage in the chat box. What kind of visuals? I mean, are you thinking about graphical visualization or animation, that kind of thing?
So, my colleague Samantha Olshan, when we explored this a few years ago, to really challenge ourselves to think about the future technology as well. So utilize. So I don't know. I mean, you could very quickly go to VR, AR, but hey, what other ways can we visualize these experiences? And I think that in itself will be a case of exploring all the different ways we can visually communicate information. But I definitely am not seeing it as probably a typical 2D experience at this time anymore.
Good. Well, I'd love to see more of that crowdsourcing. That's terrific work that you're doing, and these videos. This is excellent. Bravo. Listen, Matt, thank you so much for taking an hour to talk to us, for answering our questions that have ranged all over the world, from climate change to specifics of technology in the classroom. This is a great project, and you've been a terrific guest. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Brian. I really appreciated everyone's thoughts and listening to me for an hour. Thank you so much. Lots of things to think about.
Our pleasure. Our pleasure. Thank you. Now, before everyone goes, let me just let you know where we are for the next week, where we have a few more things coming up. So first of all, we have next week a different guest, and we're very pleased to have Cory Doctorow, who is a leading science fiction author and also one of the leading bloggers in the world, and also a cyber activist. He blogs at Boing Boing, and he is the author of a novel that we just read in our book club, which looks carefully at near future societies and where they might go, including impacts on education and the role of education in the future. This is going to be a very, very exciting event. I'm really looking forward to it. So please, next Wednesday, be ready for a great Future Transform. Now, also going on, speaking of the book club, we just finished the last chapters of Walkaway from Cory. So if you're just reading the book, if you're in the middle of it, be careful of spoilers. You can catch up and offer more comments. We've already had comments coming up, bringing it approaches to different ideas that come in this book. So it's a very, very exciting book, a very thoughtful book, one that I really recommend. So please go to the blog and catch up on Walkaway. If you'd like to get a copy of that, of course, you can go to our bookstore and get other books about the future of education and technology. And if you want to have the conversation continue on social media, we're all over the place. You can find us on Facebook, you can find us on Twitter, and on the blogosphere. Let me thank everybody today for great questions, for a terrific guest. I really appreciate the depth and richness of our ideas and how they reflect the diversity of our practice. Thank you so much. See you online, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.